Welcome back to Bookview TV. Now, this week we've been talking with business networking guru Andy Pope. His book, Business Networking for the Bewildered, was just released by Cambria Books here in Wales. Now, Andy, you talk about curiosity, patience, and a relaxed state of mind. Now, that section of the book seemed almost Zen master-like. Tell us how these traits help in building a network.
Well, I'm not sure about the guru classification there, Dennis. I don't claim to be a guru or even an expert, but certainly those three traits you mentioned. A relaxed state of mind is the very, very first thing to get. If you're not in a relaxed state of mind, you're just not going to do very well. You're wasting your money essentially going to these kind of events. It's the same with any activity. Just try and get yourself in the state of mind that is most useful for you at that event. Now that leads on then to a spirit of curiosity. So if you're going to sell to people, or you're going to try and sell your services or the idea of your services to people, you've got to find out what they want first. Because if they don't necessarily want them, they still might know other people who do. So you have to be curious about what is their history, who do they know, what do they want to know about. And patience, like I said earlier, it takes time. It takes a lot of time to build very good relationships sometimes. I've actually built good relationships with people I didn't like when I first met them. But it turned out later on, when we met in different circumstances, or maybe they had a bad day when they first met me, but on meeting them later on and talking, we got on really well. So you have to be patient, you have to be curious, and it's not always your fault. Sometimes the other person's in a bad mood. You can't win every battle. So that's it really. Just go with those three states of mind and you'll do very well.
Andy, you touched on two important factors in networking and indeed selling. The first being, what's so special about you as the seller, and what's your story? People love good stories. Why is it we so often forget our own story and how that can actually captivate and lead to sales?
It's strange. Public speaking is the same as well. Humans as a species are hardwired to like stories. We're connection machines, for want of a better description. We like to form connections. Stories give us this ability because they're not always complete. They're not always fully factual, and we can fill in our own details. So people love to hear a story. If I asked you, for example, what did you do on your holiday? I'd be very surprised if you gave me a detailed list of things you actually did on holiday. What you would do is give me a story that you played back in your own mind about what you saw and felt and did on holiday. And that's what you'd relate to me, an actual story. So you remember details. Humans remember our own stories, but we also remember other people's stories. That's why it's key, if you're going to sell or network, to actually put a story in there.
It's funny, when we do remember our own story, particularly in the proposal process, so often I see that we seem to forget the story of the person to whom we're selling. Talk about, in that proposal process, about hearing the story that they're talking about and the various drafts of the presentation that actually tells their story. Why is it so important to internalize versus memorize, which is what you say in the presentation?
Absolutely. If I was advising somebody on public speaking, I would always advise them to script things out in detail initially. But after that, don't forget the script entirely. If you try and remember a script and you make a mistake, it becomes really obvious that's what you've done. If you actually internalize your main points and you're confident about what you're going to say, you will really have trouble at making a mistake because nobody actually knows what you're going to say. So you can't really go wrong. And you just change. You can also drop other stories in if it's not suitable. What I would always recommend is you let the other person go first. People who network a lot will always ask you what you do first. They'll tell you what you do, then you can alter your presentation, if you like, to suit what they've told you they want to hear about. Listening is extremely important. So we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should use them in that ratio.
Good point. Andy, so many times in the interviewing business, which is what I'm in now, and I have to unfortunately say in networking and selling, I find myself waiting for my turn to speak because I'm always conscious of the clock in this business. But even when there was no clock, It was a trap I fell into, waiting for my turn to speak versus listening to what the client was saying. And I have to have the right answers in this chair, as do those in complex selling situations. How does one stop that urge and actually learn to stop, breathe, and learn?
Very, very difficult. It's very difficult. The urge to leap in with our own war stories and little examples is very powerful. It's very difficult not to jump in. If you ask a powerful question of somebody and they start to answer it, which they should do, give them the time to actually answer. If they stop, that's the key point. If you try and leap in at that pause, that's when you're going to stop their flow. Just remain silent and let them carry on forming their story. If you're busy thinking about what you're going to say next, it's physically impossible to actually listen to what they're saying. I mean, you're not really having a conversation at that point. It's just two people speaking at each other. So listening, active listening, is a skill. Definitely a skill. And I recommend it's a skill everybody tries to learn.
Okay, I'm going to do my best here to make sure I heard that last answer. Before I dive into, again, my favorite, formal networking events. Now, you talk about a rather unique and little-used technique of striking first, and I think you mentioned it just a moment ago, asking them about them versus telling them about you. I really liked this. How does one survive and thrive in these networking feeding frenzies?
Well, there's a lot of, at the actual events, there's a lot of things I recommend you don't do, one of which is eating. Definitely shouldn't eat and talk. If you've ever been on the receiving end of a spray load of crumbs, it's not much fun. Kissing, I've seen a lot of people kissing each other at these events and hugging. I'd recommend getting to know somebody very well first before you do this. Also, mind your manners as well. Even though other people might be behaving in an odd way, maybe they're familiar with each other, always maintain your own composure and your own politeness, if you like, your own polite mannerisms. Don't treat other people the way you'd like to be treated. Surviving in these events is difficult. Approaching groups, for example, you need to know a little bit about group dynamics. I've included some of that in the book. There are things like open groups and closed groups. It's very difficult to get into a closed group. I recommend you don't try that, but certainly look for open groups. Use the host. The host is vital at these type of events. If you're new, ask the host to introduce you to somebody suitable. Become friends with the host of these events. They're very, very useful to you.
Well, you've covered so many things. In the last 30 seconds here, you also say your business card's not a weapon of mass destruction, meaning you give one to everyone or paper the room with it. Explain that in about 30 seconds, if you could.
A lot of people are reluctant to subscribe online to various things, and yet they're quite happy to hand out their business card to all and sundry. You wouldn't stand in the street and do this, because you'd be getting calls from all sorts of strange people. I recommend you give business cards only to people that you want to remain in touch with. It's not obligatory to give these things out. If I've recently heard, it's not in the book, but if I do a second edition, I definitely will do, have a business card without even putting your contact details on there. Just put a website on there. Let people actually come through and contact you that way. It's certainly something I might be experimenting with.
Well, Andy, you talk about so many things here, and we could continue for several hours, I'm sure. The book is really chock full of useful information for anyone to use as a checklist before heading out on the road for their new business. Andy Pope, thanks so much for joining us this week on BookView TV.
Thank you, Dennis. It was my pleasure.
Our guest this week's been Andy Pope. Now, Andy's an author, professional speaker, communication consultant, coach, trainer of effective interpersonal communication skills. His book is Business Networking for the Bewildered, and it's published by Cambria Books. It's available in ebook and paperback on amazon.co.uk and amazon.com. And you can reach Andy on his website, www.erylglass.com, ERYLGLAS.com. Now, Andy, for the non-Welsh speakers here, what exactly does that stand for?
Eryglass actually means blue eagle in Welsh, for no real reason other than I like blue and I like eagles. So,
brilliant, brilliant. His author website is andrewdpope.com. So Andrew Pope with a D in the middle for his middle initial. Thanks for joining us again this week on Bookview TV, and tune in again next week when another author will sit across the Skype table from me, where we'll once again discuss books, the craft of writing them. I'm Dennis Campbell saying thank you for joining us, and good night.